And I wonder, is that kind of how you got started, or did your journey into Muay Thai and martial arts, is that something that came on later in life?
Both. So I did traditional martial arts. I started when I was like, I don't know, 12 or 13. And, there's definitely some good things to be taken away from that: distance control, confidence, competition experience, all that kind of good stuff. But, it's not obviously the same thing. And then I wrestled for a year in high school. I was pretty terrible, but again, learned tons from it. And then when I went to Penn State, I was already obsessed with MMA at that point. So I knew I wanted to join the boxing team, and yeah, tried out and did that for 4 years. Then whenever I was done boxing, I had already, during the summers, I trained a little bit at the old gym back in Lawrenceville. So I knew Warren and Mike, and I'd heard through a friend of mine that they needed a new boxing coach. So I hit them up. They, were like, come on in. Came in on a Saturday, sparred with the guys, just showed them kind of the stuff that I know. And they liked me. So I started hanging out there and training them. And that's when I really started learning Muay Thai. So, I started training and getting more serious with it. And then I think maybe a year after that, I was in Thailand and training, and I fought there. And yeah, I just kept going ever since.
So you're a traditional boxing fan then?
Yeah. I mean, I like all combat sports. That's just what I happen to end up doing. But
Yeah.
you know,
What's your thoughts on all of the different celebrity aspects I mean, fucking Ben Askren's fighting Jake Paul now. I mean, do you look at that as like a positive? I'm psyched by it because I think it gives a level of respect back. God forbid, I mean, unless Ben ends up face first on the canvas again, but you know, I like it because it's, I think, bringing eyeballs otherwise that wouldn't be fans of the sport, and it's an opportunity for boxing. But I've talked to a lot of other people that are kind of like put off by it. Where do you fall on something like this?
so I just posted about this on Instagram today. I love it. I just like fights. Like you said, we're getting more people into it. And at the end of the day, it's entertaining. Like, we're gonna see this guy who's a YouTube star and is obviously a good athlete and clearly has some boxing skills. I guess he's been boxing for a while. I don't really know much about them, but he's gonna fight Ben Askren, who's a longtime fighter, clearly not a stand-up specialist, but that's interesting to me. I love that kind of stuff.
Have you watched any of Jake's fights or his training at all?
I haven't. No, I saw the highlight of him knocking out Nate Robinson. And no, I lied. I did see one or two things on Instagram of him, like, sparring or something, but it's not something I follow too closely.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I was kind of surprised. No, I didn't watch the actual fight, but I've watched different clips because I've been caught up into this soap opera a little bit. And I'm like, fuck, I don't want to disrespect Ben and just the fact that he's been on that stage competing in combat sports his whole life. So I mean, it's kind of like Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. It's like you can't discount that. But
Exactly.
man, I guess it's only fair to give credit where credit's due. Jake Paul looks sharp. He's training with the right people. Now it's easy to do that when you're fighting an NBA basketball player that's never stepped foot in a ring before either. But
Exactly. I mean, the other thing you got to remember is that he's young. What is he, like, in his like early mid 20s, right? Something like that. And there's a reason that you see in boxing in particular, people hit their prime way earlier because it's a speed based sport. Um, it's not MMA where you can wrap people up. It's not Muay Thai where you can clinch and slow things down and use uh, just more tactics to slow it down. So Ben's not known for being the fastest guy in the world. So yeah, I really don't know. That's going to be interesting. I'm excited.
yeah, I'm curious to see, like, if he happens to be able to pull it off, where does it go from there? Because I imagine like the momentum and the confidence boost is going to get you a little. I mean, you're already dealing with seems like a very cocky individual who wants to prove that he's got something to give to the sport of boxing. But you beat Ben Askren. I mean, he's talking about McGregor, which I didn't think had a chance in hell. But if you beat Ben Askren, you might actually get that nightmare in front of you. And I think that's a
Mhm.
completely different animal when you're talking about a striking match, right?
Definitely, 100%. Yeah, I mean, that's the danger of this: is if he beats Ben, then what? Then he's going to have to, you can't go down from there. He's going to have to fight someone who, like you said, a Connor, someone who can really strike and has been doing this forever. And then, that's a nightmare for him. But I mean, also, who knows if he's going to beat Ben? Another thing that people don't realize is that boxing does have grappling aspects to it. If Ben can tie him up and clinch him up early, maybe wear on him. We don't know if he's going to have any power in the later rounds. How long is it going to be? What, an 8-rounder, something like
Yeah,
that?
I think they said 8 rounds.
They make it to 8 rounds. Ben's going to be fresh. That he's a real athlete, and anything could happen there. So I don't know, but like you were saying, yeah, if he gets past Askren, then he's going to have to fight some real competition. He's going to have to fight, either real boxers or, more striking based MMA fighters. And that might not go so well for him.
Mm-hmm. No, it always makes me laugh too, because you were mentioning like you box at Penn State. So was that club, or is that like, I remember I had a history teacher actually, John, and I'm wondering if he's related to Warren and all those guys. His name was John Stout, and he was a boxer at Lock Haven University. And he was he was a substitute teacher for like a semester in high school. And then he took on, actually like got a full-time position. He's actually, now it's even weirder, he's the one that took me over to that boxing gym in Salamanca, New York for the very first time and introduced me to those people. And I've lost touch with him. His name was John Stout, but he was a badass. And I remember him telling me, like, especially in college, everybody's a tough guy, everybody's a fighter, but there was guys like him that if you fucked with them at the wrong place at the wrong time, you were going to really regret that. And I remember a story too of a kid who was on spring break, Ocean City, Maryland, big bodybuilder looking guy with a bunch of friends, was kind of talking shit. And this guy didn't look like much. And they went down a back alley and this dude put just a beating on him, and come to find out had some boxing training. So, I don't know. I see this whole thing happening, and it's like, guy like Jake Paul. Now I see people on Instagram. Everybody's hitting the bag now. Everybody's a fucking boxer. And I'm just thinking, how many more ER visits are going to happen in the next 6 months because somebody thinks that they can go out and talk shit and back it up like Jake Paul?
Who knows? I don't know. I think if someone really dives into it, I mean, I'm sure like the real fighters, they don't want to go out and scrap. So yeah, if someone just dips their toes in and they're feeling cocky, we might see a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is a good segue, right? Because I know you wrote a book.
I did, yeah.
And it's available on Amazon, right?
Yep.
As well as your website.
Yeah. willmorrill.com.
The book, it's Combat Sports Manual.
Yeah, actually, I should have had this ready. Hang on one second.
Yeah, no, pull it up.
Yeah, the Combat Sports Strength and Conditioning Manual.
Got
a nice picture of Mike Wilkins on the front.
Oh, nice. There you go. It really interests me. I didn't know that you wrote a book, and I was, a couple weeks ago when I was initially thinking about reaching out to you for the second time, I was like, oh shit, he wrote a book. And it fascinates me because that was the whole reason, I think, to my point earlier, that I got into martial arts was around strength training, because I grew up an athlete. I played Division III baseball. I got into powerlifting. I ballooned up. I was, Mr. Tough Guy. And that kind of faded. And I saw, it was like when MMA was at its prime, right? It's like 2011. Everybody was kind of coming mainstream. And the realization that I had was that these people were by far the most conditioned, in shape athletes beyond anybody, right? From a combination of strength, functional strength, flexibility, speed, power, explosiveness. They encompassed every aspect of that. And so that's why I started to go there. It had nothing to do with fighting. I didn't really want to get punched in the head. I had no experience. I just thought, why not go and train with a bunch of people who will push me in these areas? And when I saw you wrote a book, I'm like, well, shit, this is right up his alley. And I was going to kind of try to bridge it with, how does a guy like Ben Askren or Jake Paul prepare for something like this? But I think take it back even further, just to the fundamentals and basics of what you write about in this book and kind of what's important from your perspective.
Great question. And you actually covered a lot of it right there. You were saying how, these fighters have all these different physical attributes And a lot of that gets developed through, fight sports themselves. And that's a really key part of my training program, is that I try not to do things that are too redundant. So, for example, if I've got, and it also depends on like the style of fighter that someone is, so if I'm training a fighter and they're on the mats nonstop and they're, I don't know, in the gi, for example, a lot, not that a lot of fighters are, but, I'm not going to do a ton more grip work because they're already doing a lot of that. If anything, I'm going to have them do, extension through their hand to try to offset that. And same thing with like neck stuff. I'm not too excessive with it. So all my guys clinch a lot. And, one, they're building skills through that. And two, they're building neck strength. You're carrying a person. So when we're in the weight room, I'm not having them do, you know, 10 sets of extended neck exercises, granted, if you're a boxer and you're not clinching all the time, then yeah, that's a good idea. So yeah, I try not to be redundant. I try to focus on the things that really matter, building absolute strength, building power. You're not going to build a ton of absolute strength on the mats. Just, due to the fact that there's not enough resistance generally. So, I have my guys lift relatively heavy and pretty low reps, and try to stay fresh because I don't want them so burnt out from the weight room that they get on the mats and then they're diminished out there where they're building skills, which really matter. And to build strength doesn't take that much time, I suppose. So, we'll do 3 sets of 3 to 5 reps on a strength exercise, long rest in between, nice and fresh, and then they're good to go on the mats. So yeah, I mean that's kind of like the core things there. I include power training into every session because again, there's no point in being strong if you can't access that strength quickly. I do a ton of rehab or prehab exercises, whatever you want to call it, in between our sets, right? So um, you know, if they hit a heavy set of squats, well, one, MMA fighters tend to rush things. So they might hit a heavy set and then, 30 seconds later, they're trying to hit their next one. And obviously they need more reps. Then that's when they get hurt. So I sprinkle that in between the big heavy stuff. Obviously make sure it doesn't interfere with that. Yeah, just try to get a nice mix of everything without being too redundant and really focus on the things they need without overworking them.
Hmm. Where do you fall with conditioning and cardio as it pertains to like road work? Because I like boxing's always been big about like going on the runs. And I had a conversation with Dr. Corey Peacock about this,
Mhm.
and he's connected with Chris Algieri and
Mhm.
did some strength and conditioning training with him. And now Chris is a part of that Sanford MMA squad down in Florida where Corey is. And, Corey said that Chris came into the gym, was like really big on the runs, and Corey's not big on running. He actually thinks that there's some detriment to that, but that he tries to understand that there's a psychological effect, especially with boxers, that they just need to go get that road work in. But I'm always curious because I think it's such a widely disputed concept, right? Like, do you get your conditioning just from training or actually going out and focusing on conditioning?
Oh, again, they're opening a big can of worms there. So, uh, first off, in strength and conditioning, there's a million ways to do things, right? So I'm not gonna be like, oh, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. The other thing is, I'm really biased. I absolutely hate running. I had to do it all the time in college, and I'm not a fan. I don't enjoy it, um, and I don't make any of my fighters do it. With that said, there are some guys who just love it and they feel like they need it. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Um, in terms of how we run, that's what I think is important. So we want to have a good aerobic base, uh, but I don't see the point of running marathons if you're training for, a 3 5 minute round fight. That's just it's not the same thing. And again, we need that aerobic base, but there's a lot of different ways to get it. Me personally, I hate running, and part of the reason I hate that is like I'm not naturally the most durable athletic person in the world. Um, so when I was doing all this running, I didn't really understand. I was getting joint issues all the time. I had a really hard time, keeping strength in certain areas of my hips and stuff, uh, which keeps your joints safe while you're running. So I think you have to have a prerequisite amount of strength to be able to run, which I didn't necessarily have at the time. And it's also kind of body type dependent. Like, you're not gonna. I have like pretty good endurance, and all that running I don't think helped me. I should have been lifting more. Um, but if you have someone who's naturally really strong, run, get after that cardio. With that said, again, million different ways to get that cardio. So if people like to run, cool. If people like to swim, cool. Personally, I feel like get in the gym, you know, do pad rounds for an hour straight. That's your aerobic base, go and wrestle. That's your aerobic base. I don't really see a huge need to get outside of that. And additionally, we're getting skill work while you're doing that. So I think that's a really good way to kill two birds with one stone. Um, with that said, occasionally we do need to do some things that are just conditioning based. So when it's nice outside, I take the guys outside. We do some sprints. I think that's a little bit more fight specific, especially when we're talking about amateur fights. Or it's faster pace. Just 3 2-minute rounds sometimes.
Mhm.
And also when we get closer to fights, we'll do what we call fight sims. So whatever their competition is, I'll have them do like one, maybe two extra rounds outside of that. So for example, if I've got someone who's getting ready for a pro fight, it's gonna be 3 5-minute rounds. I have them do 4 5-minute rounds where every 30, 45 seconds, they're switching between, striking, grappling drills, maybe pushing a sled, anything that they might encounter in that fight, however they're going to have to use their body. So,
Mhm.
and then of course that gets specific to who they're fighting. So if they're fighting a wrestler, it's going to be a lot of takedown defense. But getting back to the strength and conditioning part of that, I just try to target like what they're going to use. So they might be holding, digging underhooks on someone and really grinding against the cage for 30 seconds straight, and then immediately they've got to go crack pads, and they have to have that, that explosivity even after draining, their arms and everything really after
Mhm.
cage wrestling. So again, getting back to the running, is it necessary? I say no. There's obviously, tons of great fighters who do it. And that's another thing you touched on that I think is important. Sometimes the physiological benefits aren't necessarily what's important about that method of training. So again, if someone's like, hey, if I run 3 miles every day, that puts me in the right headspace where I think that I'm not going to get tired, that great. You're probably not going to get tired. The placebo effect is real. American wrestlers are oftentimes physiologically overtrained, but that kind of leads to their mental toughness. So, as long as you're not hitting that point of diminishing returns, go for it. Um,
Mhm.
and like I said, a million different ways to do it. I personally don't like it. Hope that answered the question.
No, it's interesting because I mean, there's a big fight coming up with Usman and Burns,
Hmm.
and Usman's notorious for not running because of knee problems.
Hmm.
I mean, and I don't think you can find somebody who you could say has like hands down better cardio than him. He's like at the top of the food chain when it comes to conditioning, and that seems to come strictly from just training and building up that cardio base. And I'm sure, I mean, the guy's a freak, so there's just natural ability that comes along with that. But I always kind of go to him, and then I think you said something else that was important, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you could have really good cardio from running, but that may be a little different than cardio from grappling, right? Because as my ass getting back into jujitsu, I'm not in great cardio from running either, but the first few nights on the mats, I would have thought that I never ran in my entire life because it's just a different type of cardio, right? Because your blood is being pumped to muscles that you aren't using when you're running, and you're using up all that oxygen that's in your system. So I don't know what that mechanism is. I'm ignorant when it comes to like physiology, but to me, it seems like it's completely different, anyways.
Yeah. So first off, everything in sports is like very specific. So if you want to have grappling endurance, you've got to grapple. If you want running endurance, you got to run. Actually, really good example of that. Paul Felder, when he just came back and fought, he was running and doing triathlons and stuff, and there he was wrestling and getting tired from it, because, like you said, it's different. So one, we have different bioenergetic systems, right? We've got the phosphagen system, we've got our glycolytic systems and our aerobic systems. Obviously, MMA fighters have to have all of that. But I mean, even within that, like I was saying before, there's sport specificity. So if we're building muscular endurance in your lower body from running, and then you have to go and wrestle and, like we're saying, digging under hooks against the cage and holding weird positions, where you're isometrically burning out your muscles, that's totally different. And yeah, if you don't train specifically for that, your body's not going to be prepared.
Where do you fall like with diet? as it pertains to that. Obviously, like strength and conditioning is a big part. Diet always goes hand in hand with strength and conditioning. I'm
Yeah.
assuming you're not going to tell me just go and eat whatever you want, but I mean, do you have a philosophy on that? I mean,
Well, one, I'm not like a nutrition specialist, so I dabble a little bit. I know a little bit about it, but I'm not like the end all be all resource for that. With that said, I try to keep things as simple as possible for my fighters. So number one is they have to get enough protein. That's pretty obvious. I always tell them somewhere between zero point 0.7 and 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight that they have. As long as they're hitting that, then I want them to eat healthy fats, because your body needs that. Those are all just requirements. And then carbs, specifically when you're going to work out. And this is really important when they're like cutting weight, or they at least have to like keep an eye on their weight. Uh, so carb timing is slightly more important there. And obviously, if they need to lose a good amount of weight, I'll get a little more specific about that. Uh, but for the most part, it's just like, it's not rocket science. Eat foods that are healthy. If if I saw them eating it, would I go like, "Hey, don't do that"? It's not super difficult. And I mean, there were times that I would read like all kinds of studies about various chemicals in certain vegetables and stuff, and all their the physiological changes that can happen if you ingest certain amounts of them and stuff. And the further and further I went down this rabbit hole, I took a step back and I was like, wait a minute, I'm reading all these studies, and at the end of the day, the conclusion that I would actually pass on to my fighters is just like eat vegetables, eat healthy foods. So again, I don't think it's rocket science. Again, it can obviously get much more specific and scientific. And for world class athletes who have to like really dial things in, it's important to be on point with that. With that said, for the average fighter, for the average person, get your protein requirements, eat some healthy fats, eat carbs when you're working out. Pretty much good to go there.
yeah, and I'm glad you brought up weight cutting, because this is one too. I'm just hitting you with all these like rapid fire controversy. Like,
Bring it on.
give me your opinion on this. Will, put yourself out there. But I've had people on who have said, "Hey, look, weight cutting is just it's dangerous. We should do what ONE FC does. We should try to do some sort of hydration test. People should fight at their own weights." And then I've had other people on. I talked with Mike Dolce, and he's like, "Don't be fooled. Those hydration tests can be manipulated just as easy as everything else. It sounds great, but it doesn't solve the problem. And if you cut weight properly and you do it the right way, there's very minimal risk to that." And I'm sure there's truth on both sides of that, right? But as somebody who, you're working with a lot of amateur and professional athletes, so weigh-ins are kind of structured differently in that sense. And so you get to see fighters who really kind of get to fight close to their I would imagine from an amateur perspective, they're fighting pretty close to what they're walking around at, because they don't have the time to rehydrate as much, where a professional is really trying to cut that weight as much as possible and then pack it on before the fight. Do you see a difference? And is it even possible to see a difference because you're dealing with pro versus amateur?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much to unpack here. I could talk about this forever. So, uh, yes. So in amateurs, if they're weighing in the same day, and when I say same day, I mean they're weighing in the morning and they're fighting that night. If they're weighing in at like 3 o'clock and fighting at like 5, you're not cutting anything. You're cutting 1-2 pounds just to like hit whatever number they need. But if they actually are going to get a solid rest of the morning, afternoon to rehydrate, I never let them cut more than 5% of their body weight with the water cut. They can obviously lose weight leading up to that, but I don't want them cutting more than 5%, and ideally less. Like less is more in that situation. So we're looking at pretty minor weight cuts there. Obviously, the higher in weight you get, 5% becomes a little bit more. But I really don't want my guys cutting even close to 5%. Honestly, but 5%, anything more than that, I just say no. Pros, my limit's 10%. And again, not that they should be cutting 10%. Just that's like the kind of limit that I say anything past this and we're getting into dangerous territory. So that's kind of like the major difference between pros and amis. In terms of weight cutting, just overall, uh, in an ideal world, I don't think there should be any weight cutting. I think that there should be like really vague weight classes, just kind of like, hey, this guy's like somewhere in the 160 to 180 weight class. And obviously, there's no way that this could happen just because,
Hmm.
people are always looking for a competitive edge. But, people just go like, hey, that guy's roughly my size. Let's go fight, and I think that's how it should be done. Obviously, not how it works. Hydration tests would be better. Like Dolce was saying, there's ways to, get around that.
Hmm.
And people are always going to game the system. But I think that more testing would probably be better. And if they can get them to cut less weight, that's awesome. Uh, with that said, that's not where we're at least outside of one FC. So, I try to keep my guys in the right amount of weight that they cut. But unfortunately, they have to cut weight. If you get a guy who walks around at 155 and he fights at 155, he's going to end up fighting a monster who's 180. So you do have to cut some weight, but then you hit that point of diminishing returns where your cardio starts to lack, or maybe some of the snap comes off your punches, or you can't take punches as well. And that's something that I dealt with a lot in college. I cut down to 165. I'm 6'3", so like that's I was pretty skinny, and especially my senior year, I did a lot of fights at 175 just because it was hard for me to make the weight. I was probably hovering around 180, 185, somewhere in that range. And then for nationals, I went back down to 165, and my last college fight ever was probably one of my worst because I just had no cardio, no pop. So I get out there, I'm just sluggish, I'm moving, I'm just trying not to get hit, and really couldn't do much. So one way of bringing this back, I try not to put my fighters in that situation. I adhere by those rules. Amis are never cutting more than 5%. Pros are never cutting more than 10%. And I really try to make sure they're doing it properly, rehydrate properly, and hope for the best.
What's your basis behind the percentage there? Is it just kind of when you look at 10%? So from a pro, 10% on a 150 pounder is 15 pounds, right? So I think that's right. I'm probably
Yeah.
making myself look like an asshole because I don't know how to do general math, but I think that's right. Yeah. Um, I mean, is that kind of the thought of like just knowing that somebody at that weight can safely, just from experience, lose that 15 pounds based on their body mass and get back to that? Or
Yeah.
are you kind of tapping into other data points that you've learned along the way?
Yeah. So there's a couple things there. One is just anecdotally, I've been, through a ton of fighters' weight cuts now, and I kind of know roughly like, you know, what they can handle. Also, I saw some really good information about UFC fighters and how much weight they cut. And I forget exactly. It was a really cool table. It showed like percentage of winners how much they cut, and percent of the losers what they cut. And unfortunately, the winners are cutting about 10%. And the losers were, I think, we're cutting a little less. Maybe I'm mixing that up, but I know that right around 10% was that sweet spot. And again, I try not to have them go all the way to 10% because I think it's excessive. That's when, you know, medically speaking, they kind of consider that like severe dehydration. So I
Mhm.
really try not to put them in that situation. Um, and so yeah, so anecdotally, the fact that that gets you to severe dehydration, and the data that I've seen about fighters being successful, how much they cut, that's kind of where I got that number from.
Mhm. Because I mean, and it's interesting because there's a lot of studies, and it's just leading me into everything that I want to talk with you about. But it's from like a head trauma standpoint, I would imagine dehydration plays a huge part in that, at least from the little bit that I've read, right? That just being dehydrated, I don't know what the factors are from that, but allows you to be impacted much more severely by brain trauma.
Yeah, 100%. So if you cut too much weight, you're not going to be able to replenish the amount of cerebral spinal fluid that you need to cushion your brain and take those impacts. Which the brain's not great at taking impact anyways, and when you take away one of its main mechanisms for defending against that, uh, super dangerous situation. That's why the deaths that you see in boxing are always the lower weight classes where guys are sucking tons of weight. It's not the heavyweights who are just kind of as healthy as they can be. Um,
Who, by the way, are punching exponentially harder than somebody at a lower weight class.
right, exactly. Which in some ways I also kind of think in the same way that MMA I think is safer than boxing in that way, where if you get hit as a heavyweight and just lights out, fight's over, you're good. Well, you're not good, but you're not getting hit in the head anymore. Same thing with 4-ounce gloves. I feel like guys get put out, and also the fact you can hit them on the ground. The fights get stopped after that. Whereas if you take a boxer who's 115 pounds, or I guess fighting at 115 pounds, they might weigh 125 on fight night, and they're just crushing each other. And these are serious punchers. It's obviously not the same impact as heavyweights, but it's just repeated effort. And especially in boxing, where you get 8 counted, where you're severely concussed, and these dudes are so tough that they'll get back up within 8 seconds, and then they go and get concussed again, worse and worse and worse. Over the course of a longer fight, that's not good for the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sitting here thinking about Calvin Cater and Max's fight. And just, it's like, to your point, I can't think of one time I've ever watched a heavyweight fight that was a brawl like that, to your point. I mean, not that there hasn't been like a really good heavyweight. I don't want to like put that there hasn't been good heavyweight fights, but I can't think of like a 5-round war where guys just put that much volume on each other.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Kane JDS fight.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, that is, I agree. I think that it's more common at smaller weight classes than to see it heavyweights.
Yeah. So what's the like protocol over in Thailand when it comes to weight cutting?
Oh man,
Because they fight like all the time, right? I mean, it's
yeah,
like you'll have somebody that I don't know if it's like weekly, but I feel like what I understand about people in Thailand is just like, you want to fight tonight? Yeah, sure. Well, you can fight tonight.
yeah, dude, it's chaos. So first off, yeah, they fight all the time, and again, like you don't know necessarily when you're fighting. Like when I fought there, I showed up to this festival, and I apparently didn't even have an opponent set up. They were just like, who wants to fight this foreigner? And some guy was like, all right, I'll do it. So yeah, they're fighting all the time. For that, we obviously didn't weigh in because we're kind of the upper limit of ties. But the ties, like the elite ties that I saw there, how they make weight, first of all, was just like not good. Oh man, there's just so much to say about this. So I saw guys the day that they were fighting, sauna suits in 95-degree weather, super humid, just ripping pads for like 8 rounds the day they had a fight. And I'm just like, dude, that can't be good. And I obviously don't speak Thai, so I don't know if they were water loading and stuff. But just based on what I saw, I don't think that they were really adhering to the same principles that I have like my fighters use. And then the absolute worst thing was at 13 Coins, which is this legendary camp. Cian Chai trained there. Sung Mani, all kinds of great fighters were there, and they had this water bottle hanging up, and it's outside. So it's like a covered roof, and then there's just a bunch of rings under there, no walls. And hanging up, they had this water bottle with a surgical hose coming out and a needle, and that needle never got changed. And all the guys shared it. I don't think they cleaned any of it, so they would cut weight horribly, and then just bang in IVs of who knows what through this disgusting needle. Yeah, I think that weight cutting is definitely in the boxing world, but especially in the Muay Thai world, I think that's a science that has yet to really catch up.
So how did you end up over there? It was through Stout?
hmm Yeah. So, like I said, I was only at the gym for maybe a year or so at that time, and the guy who was running the program before me wanted to, take a little training trip over there, and Warren really made it happen. He got me a plane ticket, sent me over, and you know, I was there for I think 5 weeks or so, uh, and yeah, just kind of tossed into that world training. And they're like, "Hey, we can set up a fight for you." And at that point, I'd already said, "I'm like, oh, I'm not fighting anymore." But if you're in Thailand,
Like,
and
how do you turn that down?
yeah, exactly. So I was like, "Yeah, whatever, let's do it." And yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been, so it's on my bucket list. I've said that multiple times on this show. It just seems like such an amazing culture, such a different culture, but an amazing culture. Seems like a very friendly culture.
Mhm.
It seems like all the great things that we enjoy in America and probably take for granted are just on display, from food to friendliness to the great weather. I mean, am I hitting on all the right things here as far as Thailand, or am I gravely mistaken?
No, I mean it's great. It's fantastic. The level of training there is just unbelievable. I've learned so much through training in Thailand and fighting there, and meeting the trainers from there. Um, I do think that it gets kind of idealized a little bit by people. Not saying you shouldn't go. Not saying it's not awesome, but you know, by the end of the 5 weeks, I was ready to come home. I'm not really a hot weather type of guy, and there's tons of great food, and I eat all of it, all the street food, everything, which is probably why I get sick every time I go there. But like, I just can't keep weight on when I'm there, and then my joints start hurting, and there's your own set of problems training in Thailand. But yeah, overall, it's absolutely awesome. The trainers there, there's just so much tradition that's been passed down, and so much technique, and just seeing how the elite Thais train. I remember the first time I was there, I was training with Sung Mani. He was only like, I don't know, 18 at the time or something like that. And I would watch him do like, I don't know, 8 rounds in a row, hard on the pads, like really hard. And then immediately go do bag work, and then clinch work, and then, boxing pad work, and then go spar a little bit. And, this is his second training session of the day. And just like seeing that work ethic, it seeps in on you. Um, so yeah, I mean, Thailand's awesome.
Yeah, culture is such a big part of that. I think about some of the conversations I've heard about like the Cuban wrestling program being, obviously way different, but very similar in that it's ingrained into the culture and it's tied into that. And there's so many distractions here in America. It's like it actually amazes me sometimes, especially today in 2021, that we do have people, and like thank God that it's like a breath of fresh air when you see somebody who's from America with all the distractions still be focused and driven to accomplish a goal. Because I it's got to be easier when you're living in another place where that pursuit, that individual, activity, whatever it is really center point to the culture. And so there really isn't anything. There's not other pursuits of happiness. It's like you're either a fighter or you're nothing, or you're a wrestler, you're an Olympian, you're a boxer, you're nothing. And that's really where the social status lies in a lot of these places.
Yeah, I mean, also just like the necessity of it. So, Thailand, for example, a lot of the fighters, they're guys from like Isan, or somewhere that's a rather poor area. They'll come down to Bangkok, start training, start fighting, just so they can make money and support their family. And they have to fight nonstop to do that. And if that's the only way that you're living, you're going to get good at fighting. Like that's just how it works. And that's something that, like you're saying, I don't think Americans truly understand that, in Thailand, it's like these kids have to fight, they have to train, everything goes into this. I mean, even Pets Morcott, I just saw a thing on Instagram where he had to start like delivering food on the side so that he could just make ends meet, because there's not a lot of fights for him. And he's, elite level Thai. He's a one FC champ, or not one. One champion. And cut off fights for a little while, and he's not making ends meet. Like that'd be the equivalent of a UFC champion showing up, delivering Uber Eats. So when you're put in that situation, you're going to train hard and you're going to get really good.
Where does the background and culture of fighting come from in Thailand? Is there like do you know where that originates from, or is it?
So I'm going to butcher this, but the origin of Muay Thai, I believe, is there was a Thai warrior, and to let him free, he had to like fight Cambodian soldiers, and I think he defeated like 10 of them in a row using Muay Thai. And I think that's like the kind of the origin story. I know that's like a famous legend. I'm, again, probably butchering this horribly, but long story short, it's just generations and hundreds of years of developing that fighting style under that specific rule set. And it's the national sport of Thailand, so it's obviously a big deal. They put great importance into it, and that leads to that culture.
Mhm. It's just it fascinates me so much because of how effective it is. You know what I mean? It's like you look around the world and you see all these different forms of combat, right? So wrestling, boxing, then you have submission grappling, jiu-jitsu, and then Muay Thai. And I don't think somebody who's, who's very skilled at boxing, that's great. But I just, from my view, I see somebody who's extremely skilled at Muay Thai is going to be a problem for somebody who's just really skilled at boxing. Obviously, there's two more appendages that are going to be coming, but even a traditional kickboxer, that Muay Thai attack, it just seems like a problem. And the same way that somebody who understands submission grappling is a problem, even for somebody who understands how to wrestle and grapple, there's just a new level. And so that like this small little portion of the world to develop an art form that is so much more effective than all the other forms of striking across the world that have probably developed in similar fashions, but just in its own vacuum somewhere else under its own set of circumstances. It blows my mind that this little place, and then on top of it, you explaining like how they're training, and it's still, just the top of the top as far as skill sets.
Yeah. So, oh man, there's a lot to unpack there too. So Muay Thai, I think, is so effective because one, it's so permissive, right? So it's not like, boxing or kickboxing where, there's no clinch or obviously no kicks in boxing. And actually, before I dive into this, it's the practitioner, not the art. If you can take someone who's like just an overall badass and they kind of know how to throw a punch, and they could fight some dude who like knows all the submissions in the world and knows everything about fighting, but they're just like not tough, they're going to lose. But that aside, why I think Muay Thai is so dominant and why it's so important is it's permissive in terms of its rule set, right? We have clinch, we have knees, we have elbows, and it's super super tough, obviously, with like we're talking about the culture and the fact that there's this ranking system and guys are just trying to work their way up, and it's so important to them. And also I think it carries over to other sports too. So within MMA, guys who are traditionally Thai fighters, they generally don't have as good boxing, but you can make up for that in other ways with clinch and kicks. Also, their wrestling they can pick up really easily because clinch is very similar. Clinch is basically jiu-jitsu standing up. It's a lot of the same principles. And you obviously develop insane balance. I remember AJ, one of the Stout fighters, he was in Thailand and he was talking about one of the fighters just getting launched and like a cat just spinning around up in the air and his balance. And he was talking about how if this kid went into wrestling, he'd be awesome. And again, a lot of that's developed through clinch. So that applies to your wrestling, that applies to your grappling. And then because we have this permissive style of striking where we include elbows, that becomes second nature to someone in an MMA environment where they can blend their punching directly into their elbows, and obviously use powerful kicks and such. Which that's an important thing too about Muay Thai is Muay Thai is scored in a really weird way, at least for Americans, where punches to the head, punches in general, don't score very well. So someone might get punched in the head 20 times, and then that guy kicks the other dude in the body, and now the guy who threw the kick is winning because body strikes score really really well. However, Thais also know that if you're down on the scorecards and you got to knock someone out, they switch it over to punching. Yeah, long way of saying Muay Thai encompasses everything. It's absolutely incredible in that way, and because it's been developed for so long in Thailand, it's grown to this level where people who train there and really understand Muay Thai they have such an advantage over other styles.
Mm-hmm. No, it's really interesting. I had something I was going to ask you just now, and I completely blanked. I'm sure.
Sorry, I start talking and go down rabbit holes. And
No, you're fine. You're fine. I don't know where. Oh, I know where I was going to go. So there's a guy on social media that I've heard talked about on a number of different podcasts and just some of the different martial arts pages that I follow. His name's Eric Samuelson. I don't know if that name rings a bell to you or not, but he's got these videos where he's um, kicking a bag, punching a bag, and there's a lot of controversy of whether or not he speeds up his videos. I guess it's irrelevant if you haven't seen it. I'm not going to make you watch it right this second, but I'm going to send you some links, and I want to get your opinion because I've heard even like experts who are in the boxing community. Joe Rogan's given his 2 cents. He's like, "Oh, it's real. He's not speeding it up at all." And this guy, he'll even have like people in the background doing other things at like a normal speed to kind of show that there's no manipulation of the video. Otherwise, it would look awkward for them too. But part of me is almost like you're going so far out of your way to prove that you're not speeding up your videos that it makes me think that you really are speeding up your videos.
So without having seen these, obviously, I I'm gonna guess that it's real. One, because there's freak athletes out there. There's dudes who are so fast. It's literally unbelievable. Um, and I mean, if this guy's going to lengths to show that it's not sped up, uh, eventually someone's got to be able to figure out if it is or isn't.
Yeah.
Uh, but I would just assume that there's some freaks out there who are just so fast that it's unbelievable. So again, I gotta watch it, but I would
I'll
guess
send
yes.
it. I'll send it to you. I thought about it because I think back to the original thing that I mentioned. You break down fights
Mhm.
from like movie scenes and different things like that. So I'm like, okay, this Will's used to looking at things and calling BS, or giving his insight from a professional's standpoint. So I certainly want to hear what you think about that. But what like where did this come from? Was that, obviously we all do it, right? I sit on the couch and I'm watching something, I'm like, oh, that's badass, or did you see what just happened? But like, what was the first time that that became something that you were like doing a little bit more openly?
Good question. So I was originally doing a lot of like real fight breakdowns, so I'd show, some Muay Thai fight, how someone set something up or whatever. And then I really don't know where it started, but at some point I was like, watching an action movie or something. I was like, oh, I could do like a little, fake breakdown of that. Like that'd just be like, funny, I guess. Man, I really wish I knew what the first one was now. But yeah, started doing that, and people were just so much more interested in that than real fights, which blew me away. I was like, this isn't even real. Uh, and yeah, so I just kept doing them. And one, some of the stuff that they do in fight scenes is legit. And when you see that, then you can be like, oh look, I saw that in a real fight too. It's usually not done in the exact same way, but there's certain principles that they definitely get right. Another fun thing is when you really dive into it, and I obviously didn't realize this until I started like cutting these videos up and like slow mo it and everything. But there's a lot of discrepancies between scenes that that I didn't notice before. So for example, they might, because they do a lot of fast cuts in the action to make it obviously seem like it's really intense. And when you break it down, a lot of these individual moments are not that intense. Um, and what I was getting to is like, someone will have like a lapel grip on one side, and then they'll cut to another scene and they'll have the lapel grip on the other side. Uh, or they just hit a right hand and then they'll cut to another scene and their bodies on this side, or all kinds of little goofy things like that. So that's fun to see in movies. It just, I don't know, it's fun, but movies really bother me in that, like, in this day and age, everyone knows what real fights look like. And so many movies, like modern movies even, they just, it's like they're not even trying to make it look real. Uh, the everything's so exaggerated, and it drives me crazy. I
What's the worst representation recently that you can think of off the top of your head?
Oh, it's the worst one that's come out recently. Oh man, I don't have anything good off the top of my head. The first thing that popped in my mind is I did a breakdown of a fight in I think it was a Connery movie, and it was just god awful. Like, just doesn't even look like a real fight. Um, and people just accepted that back in the day. I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that's like more recent. Um, but there's just like the flow and the technique, and it's over exaggerated. I can always just tell. It drives me crazy because there's plenty of fighters out there who you could put in these stunt positions that could make it look way more real,
Mhm.
and they just don't do that. I when was this? A few years back, I went into an audition for like a stunt position on a TV show that they were filming in Pittsburgh. And I went in no experience in any sort of film stuff, but I was like, hey, I know how to fight, relatively athletic. See what happens. So I go in, and there's hundreds of people. I'm like, I'm never gonna get involved in this. Uh, and they started calling people back, and they just had you shadow box. So I shadow boxed for a little bit. And when everyone was done, they pulled us all aside, and the guy gets up in front. And he's like, "Yeah, every single one of us told us that you knew how to fight, and there's only one of you who can, and that's Will." and they pulled me up in front, and I'm like super embarrassed because like there's all these people who have like you've been in movies and stuff. So long story short, I start training with these guys. Never actually ended up being in the TV show, but that's a different story. And everything was about like, oh, on camera, you can't throw a punch like this. It's got to be way like that so they can see it. And I'm like, dude, people aren't blind. Like they can see a real punch. Like I might have to do it slightly differently so I don't hurt someone. And maybe we have to position ourselves so the camera can pick it up. But like, just use real fight techniques. Like that drives me crazy.
What are your thoughts on the Rocky movies?
Honestly, I don't really love the Rocky movies. Just like I don't find them that entertaining. But like the fight scenes they're nothing special.
I knew you were going to break some hearts. I have I'll be honest, I have an affinity for the movies more out of nostalgia. It was like the thing that my dad would be like, "Hey, Rocky's on this weekend. Do you want to watch it?" And I saw, it may have been when Michael B. Jordan was training for, was it Creed that he was
Hmm.
in or something
Yeah.
like that? And I think he was working with Sylvester Stallone. There was like a piece talking about how Sylvester Stallone really went out of his way to try to like, and I guess at the time when you compare it to like Raging Bull or other movies, as far as the actual fight scenes, it was fairly realistic. I kind of got lost after that when Michael B. Jordan said that he would beat Roy Jones Jr. in a fight. But, you know, I have a
Yeah.
soft spot in my heart for it, but I had a feeling that you were going to have a
Yeah.
little bit of a,
I don't love fight movies. Like people talk, they'll be like, "Oh, what's that MMA movie? Never Back Down." Which actually, I was almost an extra in that too. That's also didn't work out. But yeah, like I just don't like movies about fighting because anything that's a little off in one, like how they're living or training, that bothers me because I obviously know that's not true. And then just the fight scenes themselves, like fights are dramatic enough as they are. Like I don't need these pauses. I don't need uh, you know, again fake techniques. Like just show me real stuff, or at
it's like,
least as real as you can make it.
that's that movie Warrior. That was one that
Hmm.
was similar to that. I think they actually, they filmed that in Pittsburgh. I don't know if
Maybe
you
that's the one I'm thinking of that I was almost an extra in. But
um, because that was the one where they fought multiple times in the same weekend, not even like in the same night, but it's like you can fight on Friday and then you're going to like be in a 5-round war and then you're going to fight again Saturday, which is so unrealistic. Um, and I think that's the movie where, no, you know what? I'm thinking of Foxcatcher, where he fought Big Daddy Goodrich
oh yeah,
and they changed it up and they made it
yeah, he was fighting
not
like a
Big
Russian
Daddy.
or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I was conflating those together, but
They all
Warrior
mixed
Warrior was
together.
the one that was kind of always blew my mind. I'm like, okay, if anybody who knows anything about combat sports, I maybe in this, I mean, well, definitely in the same night it's happened, but uh next day is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there have definitely been tournaments like that in the past. I think they're definitely moving away from that. There's still that's how they still do college boxing actually, which it's a little less dangerous generally.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, you're just serious pros aren't going to be doing that. And I think just overall fight movies, if you're just a regular person, you don't know anything about fighting, you just want to have a good time. Sure, it's great. But if you're involved in the fight world and you know what you're looking at, I don't take anything away from those. They're not very fun for me.
Mhm. Oh, speaking of tournaments and actually speaking of Warrior, I'm in business. My partner's Anthony Rumble Johnson.
Oh,
So
right on.
he's
Bare
a minority
knuckle.
partner in, yeah, in the specialty coffee and natural supplements company Action that I'm a part of.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw, it just got released today. He and Yoel Romero are fighting in the first round of the new light heavyweight tournament with Bellator.
Yes.
And I'm like looking at that Bellator, and I'm not, look, obviously I'm biased. I want my boy AJ to get a lot of credit. I think he's still got so much in the tank. And this fight with Yoel, I mean, if he can score a first round tournament victory over Yoel Romero, I think that's going to open up a lot of eyeballs. And that whole division, I mean, MMA in general is so competitive across all these different promotions, and I think it's so cool. And I think it's good for the UFC too to have all these additional promotions generating talent, giving guys who want another option a place to go. But I mean, that light heavyweight division, is top. I don't think there's a better light heavyweight division in mixed martial arts. And I mean, sorry, I mean, especially now with John Jones going up to heavyweight, I don't look at Izzy until he fights in that division. I don't consider him a light heavyweight.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like there's been a lot of talent that's left the UFC and gone elsewhere in that weight class.
Yeah, that tournament's going to be insane. And I mean, I think that if Rumble beats Yoel, which personally I think he will, he's probably going to win the whole thing. I mean, let's just assume that he wasn't like super skilled, which he's obviously very skilled. He has that unbelievable power that it neutralizes a lot. And then you add the fact that he is skilled on top of that, and I mean, I don't see him losing in this tournament. I think Yoel's a little too small for him, and I think that Johnson's got good enough wrestling that he can at least somewhat negate that. And also, I mean, we haven't seen Romero really wrestle a lot recently. He likes to stand up, and I think that's going to be a mistake against Rumble.
So do I. You mentioned it, man. The size. We were in Texas the end of the summer together down in Austin at where we have our headquarters. And I was like, fuck, man, I knew you were a big dude, but I guess I get disillusioned because I know you used to fight at welterweight. So in my head, I'm just like, no, you're a small guy. When we met in person for the very first time and I was like standing there, other than being like, you're a fucking monster, I'm like, how the hell did this guy ever weigh 170 pounds? Like, did not seem humanly possible. And I know Yoel's, that guy's a monster himself, but Anthony Johnson is humongous.
Yeah. Well, first off, like you said, the fact that he ever made 170 just blows my mind. I don't know how he did it. He must have killed himself to make it. And multiple times too. Like, that's just unbelievable. And then after that, wasn't his next fight after fighting at 170? Didn't he go
heavyweight
directly to heavyweight and fought Arlovsky?
Yeah, and knocked him out.
Yeah, like that's unreal. And he's big too at heavyweight. He was at least the same size as Arlovsky. He was a big dude. He carries his power into that division as well. So him at 205, I think that's like the perfect spot for him. And again, I don't think that Yoel's as big as people think. I remember, before Tyron Woodley came to the gym for a seminar, you see him on TV and he's just jacked, and you're like, he must be huge. I remember Lonnie telling me, he's like, no, dude, he's actually like a kind of normal, 170. He's like compact. He's like smaller than you think. And I was like, no, dude, he's got to be huge. And I met him and I was like, oh, he's thick, but like, he's way smaller than I expected him to be. And some of the pictures I've seen of Yoel recently, again, I think it really makes him look huge. But I think that his frame next to Rumble's, I think that you're going to see the difference in weight classes for sure.
I agree. And there's a lot of miles on those tires, with all
Definitely.
all the wrestling, the Olympic wrestling from a young age. Rumble's fresh. He's got a nice little break. He's only 36. I think I see a title run coming.
I think that's so huge for fighters too, is to staying active is important, but especially if guys aren't loving it the way they were, or really any reason that they want to just get out of the gym for a while, take some time off, let your brain recover, let your body recover, lift some weights, get really strong again. Obviously John Jones has done that in the past and, is currently doing that. You see a lot of guys who, they'll retire and then they'll come back. And sometimes they're even fresher when they come back because they're letting their body recover like that. And, 30, he's what, 36, he said?
36.
Yeah. At that weight class, that's really the prime age, you've had enough time that you can develop, physically as well as understand the game well enough. But you're not pushing too far to where, your body's, diminished. Whereas Romero's what, like 40?
43.
And
paper, probably 47 if you looked at his real burst.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, he's been through the ringer. Wrestling's got to be the most, grueling sport there is. And, I'm sure he's made weight for his entire life, thousands of times probably, and that takes its toll on you. He's obviously eaten some monstrous strikes in the past, however many wars he's had. I think that, father time catches up to everyone, and I think that's going to be an issue if he's fighting Rumble.
You just said something that really caught my interest too when it pertains to this, because you said, go lift some weights again, get strong. I don't know if you know this, but like actually I take it back. The first time I met Rumble ever, so I was in the cannabis business, still am. My brothers live in Los Angeles, and we invested in a cannabis event company, and we had AJ out there as like a celebrity guest we were doing an event called Breaking the Stigma of Cannabis in Sports, and really trying to raise awareness to the actual medical benefits and some of the what I would call hypocrisy. And we don't have to get into all that, but hey, we want to keep you safe, so we test you for things to keep you safe, but then we're going to allow you to cut 20 pounds and get in there and take brain damage, right? Which, to each their own, but let's not be disingenuous about what's really going on here. And he came out there, but he was very much retired at the time, had kind of gotten into bodybuilding. And when I met AJ, he was 270. I mean, he was enormous, right? So
Mhm.
to that point, yeah, he's definitely today, I'm sure not as strong as he was a couple of years ago, but as somebody right now, like I said, I'm probably about buck 65. I'm a hell of a lot stronger 165 pounder than I was before I weighed 15 pounds and stayed at that weight for a couple of years. I've retracted, but I feel like my muscles have a little bit of memory of some sort to manage that weight. And I go in, I guess I didn't digress as much in my strength as I did in my overall body weight, if that makes sense, right?
Yes, 100%. That's I mean, that's like physiologically how it works. That's why, like, uh, former fat guys always have like ridiculously strong calves because your body, it's used to that. It had to do that. It's also same reason why it's easier to like regain muscle that you already had than it is to grow it in the first place. Your body, for lack of better, like more scientific terms, it has muscle memory. And if you get really, really strong, your body's going to remember that. There's nervous system adaptations that your body's used to. There's, physiological in the muscle adaptations that, hang on for years. So again, taking some time away from a sport that just crushes your body and doing something like, bodybuilding, which is one of the healthier forms of weightlifting, um, that's a really good thing to do for fighters, I think, every once in a while, especially if you're hitting a point where you're feeling, stale. I mean, obviously, if you're killing it and you're just fighting all the time, keep going. But those older fighters who are like, I don't know if I want to do it, take a year off, let your brain recover, lift some weights, relax, let your body heal up, and you'll come back way stronger, way better.
Hmm. So there was one last thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and it's kind of a new obsession of mine. Uh, Bare knuckle boxing. I don't know if you've caught the bare knuckle fever at all, but a buddy of mine, Joe Miggs, he's kind of I give this guy a lot of credit. He's paving a path, and he's working very closely with bare knuckle and Dave Feldman over there, but he's doing a lot of like interviews, and I follow him, so I've kind of gotten the ability to see probably what a lot of people don't, because it's not widely publicized in mainstream. But for me, like my mainstream is right here. It's on my phone. I create my own mainstream,
Mhm.
and which is kind of the awesome part of the world we live in today. So I see it. I'm like following all these guys, Uli Diaz. I was so pumped to see Chris Lieben get back in there and end his career on a win, especially with his
Mhm.
story.
Yeah.
And you know, again, it's that split down the middle. I've heard boxing purists who are like, this is horrible, not a fan of it. Other people who just want more of it. I love it, but not sure where you fall or if you even had a chance to see it, but I want to definitely get your thoughts on it.
So I haven't gone, full in yet. Haven't watched all the fights. With that said, I am not a purist in that regard. I love all kinds of fights, and also like that's what boxing used to be before gloves and everything. It was bare knuckle and much more permissive rule set that involved more clinching. And yeah, I don't understand people who are like, oh, it's like it's hurting boxing or whatever. Again, it's first off, it's a different sport, so why do you care?
Mhm.
Second of all, like good fights are good fights. And also bare knuckle boxing is super cool, right? Like they allow a level of clinching, um, which, changes the game. You can't just clinch to stall now, because someone who's better at clinching, they might be able to sneak their hand out and start hitting you there, especially without gloves on. The fact that you get cut more easily, that's got to change some things too. You can't just like walk through punches with a high guard and absorb some impact to fire back. No, those your hands are going to slide through someone's guard. If you get cut in the wrong place, that could end the fight. So you need to have a more complex form of defense. Again, it's a totally different game. I think it's awesome. I like all kinds of fights, and I really don't understand the boxing purists who are just like anything that's kind of a freak show fight, like the Mayweather exhibition fights, or bare knuckle taking away from boxing. Like again, I just posted about this on Instagram today, but like Muhammad Ali fought Antonio Inoki back in the 70s. And I'm sure boxing purists weren't happy about it then, but like, this isn't something new. It's not like, fighters haven't wanted to just fight throughout all of history, regardless of the rule set. And again, when you get different rule sets, you get different nuances that come out, different techniques that get developed. We were talking about that with Muay Thai, how body kicks score so well that they became masters of body kicks. So if you train Muay Thai, you're going to get some of that tradition, even if you're an MMA fighter. And now your body kicks have been improved. Whereas like I was saying, in bare knuckle, or even MMA with the smaller gloves, the defense becomes a little bit more active in the guard, a little bit more complex, and higher risk too, because with big gloves you can take some damage and be okay. Whereas bare knuckle 4-ounce gloves, it's not the same thing. So yeah, I think it's great. I think it's awesome. Uh,
Well, it seems like there'd be actually less long-term consequences too, because you don't have that, again, same as like the lighter weight boxing. You don't have the repeated, for the most part, right? You don't have the repeated punches to the head, because if you get cracked enough, you're going to just go down, or you're going to get cut and they're going to stop the fight. Yeah, it's ugly. Your face is going to get scarred up, but it's not going to kill you. It's not
yeah,
going to leave you, stuttering and not being able to form coherent sentences, which I think you see far too much with certain people, especially in the sport of boxing. And,
agreed.
to the point of hurting boxing, I'm with you. I personally think, and this is just, maybe it's just timing, but boxing was in a pretty shitty place for a while. After Mike Tyson kind of went off into the sunset, boxing kind of, like, for the common person, definitely kind of fell off. And I would credit all of the other combat sports that kind of rose up in that vacuum, UFC especially, for, in a way, reinvigorating boxing to the level that it's at again, because I think we're seeing a resurgence in boxing. And I think a lot of that is because people got back into combat sports. I'm watching boxing again because I got back into watching fighting. And so MMA pulled me back into it, but I found boxing again because of it. And
Yeah,
so to me, it's like exactly opposite to what a lot of people are saying, which makes me laugh, because I'm like, what are you missing? Like, what don't you see in this?
yeah,
Or are you just mad because now you're not the one guy who has insight to share about something that you can't physically do? So like, you're protecting this little intellectual property that you think you own to be able to talk about. And so God forbid there's something new where somebody else is going to come in and talk about it, and you can't do anything about that now because you don't know anything about the other sports and you can't physically go and compete in it. So you're kind of just like put out to pasture.
oh, I couldn't agree more. You said so much stuff that I agree with. One, getting back to the bare knuckle boxing being safer, there's also a limit to how hard you can hit people bare knuckle. So that obviously takes off the repeated trauma. um Agreed that boxing was definitely not in a great place. And again, people like fights. If you're into one sort of fighting, you're going to start watching other types of fights. So it definitely elevates all those levels. And again, I don't understand why, like you're saying, boxing analysts, why they don't feel like they can, then learn about these other sports. If you understand one form of, martial arts, especially within the striking world, this is what I try to teach this all the time to my fighters and students, is that the techniques are not what's important in striking. It's the concepts. So, for example, in bare knuckle boxing, the range is distance control. Let's just actually better example, boxing versus kickboxing, right? Distance control is an important thing, right? The concept of being out of range when you don't want to get hit, and being in range when you're going to hit someone, pretty simple, makes sense. Obviously in kickboxing that range is longer because we have kicks. It's not rocket science. The concept's the same. You just have to learn different techniques that fall within that. And so again, these boxing guys, they're like, oh, I understand jabs, I understand hooks, whatever. It's like, no, dude, it's the same thing. Substitute a hook in for a round kick. When would we use this, right? Oh, we're going to the body and that opens up the head. That's tons of Muay Thai fights. Look at them crush the body with kicks and then they sneak one upstairs. It's the exact same thing. And the fact that people get stuck in these individual sports drives me crazy when the concepts are the exact same thing. Even across sports, in terms of jujitsu versus striking. One thing I teach a lot of is any striking exchange has got to have three parts, right? There's got to be an entrance, there's got to be the damage, and there's got to be a disengagement. Same thing applies in jujitsu. So if I'm doing a boxing combination where I'm using like, I don't know, something simple, a double jab to close distance, I land a big right hand and then I roll out to the side as my disengagement. Same thing applies in jujitsu, right? Maybe I use, I don't know, an arm drag to get to the back and that's my entrance. And then, I'm not great at jujitsu, but I play some sort of like hand fight to get to my position, and my disengagement would then be finishing the fight with a rear naked choke, or, standing up if you're an MMA fighter. I could go on forever about this, but again, if you understand one combat sport, more importantly, you understand the concepts behind that sport, as long as you understand or can learn the techniques in another combat sport, it's all the same stuff.
Well, and what a way to close, because I think for anybody who's listening to this who's not into fighting, who decided to stick on and keep listening because this was fascinating you, everything we just talked about and the concepts that you just talked about, that can translate to life. Your entrance, the damage, your exit, it it's really no different whether it's business or boxing, right? So I mean, it's massively different in one set of circumstances, but when you're looking at just strategy, it's the same thing. How do you set it up? How do you enter? How do you engage when you're there? And then how do you get out?
Exactly. Exactly. If you just keep going to a high enough level, there's similarities between everything. It's the whole Musashi thing. Once you learn the way in one thing, you see
See
it
it in all
broadly, or
things.
yeah, exactly. You see it in all things because it's all the same stuff. That's the same thing with lifting. It's all the same stuff. There's if the concept, if the physiological adaptation I'm trying to get is, I don't know, a stronger quad, do I have to use the technique of back squats to make that happen? No, I can do all kinds of different things. And people get so caught on one specific thing. Oh, kettlebells, barbells, back squats, front squats. Dude, it's all good, right? Same thing. Boxing, bare knuckle boxing, kickboxing. It's all the same stuff.
Well, so it was a blast, man.
Yeah, this was great.
I appreciate it. Where again can they find the book?
Books on Amazon. It's the Combat Sports Strength and Conditioning Manual. This is the system I use with all my fighters. The whole concept is to not spend a lot of time working out, so you can spend more time training fight sports. So if that's your thing, check that out.
You're at Coach Will Morrill.
Yes, that's Coach Will Morrill. You can see some breakdowns and my ramblings.
Thank you again. I